Sean Diddy Combs was convicted on 2 federal charges, each carrying up to 10 years in prison. But now, in a twist maybe no one saw coming, reports say President Donald Trump's team has been in talks with Diddy's lawyers about a possible presidential pardon. Could Trump really set Diddy free?
The confirmation didn't arrive with drama. No grand announcement. No victory speech. No emotional soundtrack. Just a statement pushed out into the world, brief and official.
After this whole criminal trial, 7 weeks of testimony and a verdict that ended in Sean Diddy Combs' conviction on 2 federal sex crimes charges, could he be pardoned by the President of the United States? You know, that is a question that came up a lot when we were doing the live streams of the Diddy trial every day on YouTube. I never really considered it as a real possibility, but I'll tell you what, now, based on current reporting, we may have to take this seriously. Oh, and in terms of relief for Diddy, we also have to get into his defense team's new memo that they filed arguing that his conviction should be thrown out, or at the very least, he should get a new trial. We're going to talk about that too. And by the way, let me tell you, we have an amazing guest who I'm going to be bringing on in a little bit, somebody who actually helped secure federal pardons for his clients, including from President Trump, and is an expert in criminal law, has been following this case from the very beginning. I'm going to bring him on in a little bit. But why do I say that we have to take pardons seriously now? Why? Well, TMZ has reported that President Donald Trump's administration has been talking to Diddy's legal team about a potential pardon, a forgiveness for a federal crime. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And according to TMZ, his decision to pardon Diddy may be determined based on if Judge Arun Subramanian grants Diddy bail, which, by the way, we dedicated a whole sidebar to the other day. His team just filed a brand new letter with the court asking for him to be released. I broke it down, discussed all those arguments. But TMZ also has reported that the pardon decision could also come down to how Diddy is ultimately sentenced on October 3rd. And remember, he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, but he was found guilty of the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, namely transporting his exes, Jane and Cassie Ventura Fine, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison, although I'll tell you, in a prior filing, the government was looking at roughly 4 to 5 year prison sentence. Mind you, this is before a pre-sentencing report has been prepared for the court, which does a full background check and analysis of Diddy's life and crimes. Now, the defense would definitely love time served and he gets out, or 21 to 27 months. And remember, at the time of sentencing, he'll have been locked up for a full year, so he'll get credit for that. And the judge has discretion here because there's no mandatory minimum when it comes to these charges. But anyway, as 5 years in prison, Trump pardons him, he's free to go. President Trump was asked about this a few months ago before the verdict. This was back in May. And he said when asked about a pardon for Diddy, I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, that relationship busted up from what I read. I don't know, he didn't tell me that, but I'd read some little bit nasty statements in the paper all of a sudden. And Diddy had been photographed with Trump over the years. There was some sort of relationship there. President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show The Apprentice. The problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There's a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, if Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war. In another video on Revolt, he says white men like Trump need to be banished. And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, see, Trump don't like S like this, buddy. You run your mouth too much. And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distraction. He would consider pardoning anyone who was being mistreated.
Confirming what many had already been waiting for. The sentence had ended. The paperwork was complete. The door was open. And with that confirmation, everything changed all over again. Because confirmation hits different than rumors. Rumors live in speculation. Confirmation lands like a weight. It removes doubt and replaces it with reality. And reality makes people uncomfortable. The moment officials put it in plain language, the internet stopped guessing and started reacting. Some people felt anger first. Not loud anger, but tight anger. The kind that sits in the chest and doesn't need words. To them, the confirmation felt like a failure. Like the system quietly admitting that consequences have an expiration date. They didn't care about legal explanations or timelines. They cared about the feeling that something unfinished had just been stamped as complete. Others felt vindicated. They had been saying it was coming, saying the release was inevitable, saying the outrage wouldn't stop the process. For them, the confirmation wasn't shocking.
All the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, and would have never came in if he was merely being prosecuted for prostitution, particularly the Intercontinental Hotel footage of him purporting to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine. And he says, at the very least, he needs a new trial. I hand it over to you. You think this is a successful argument?
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be successful in the judgment of acquittal. I think the argument is interesting because everyone agrees he might be the only person in custody right now that has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. The Mann Act, and it gives a nice history of the Mann Act, and a lot of people don't understand what the Mann Act is, but the Mann Act was enacted because of a racist motivation that white women were being recruited by people of color to go across state lines and make money. So actually pimping those women across state lines and making money off of their sexual exploits. Obviously, that's not the case here. It's used so infrequently, it might have been a handful of people who were actually charged with the Mann Act. No one in custody currently has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. So it's an interesting argument to say, hey, listen, this Mann Act, the original reason for it was racist. The original way that it was applied was racist. The way it's applied here is incorrect because he was not making any money from quote unquote pimping or getting these women across, or men getting them across state lines. None of that was being done. This was all being done for entertainment purposes. So it's an interesting argument. I don't think this judge buys it. It might be interesting on an appeal, but I don't think the judge is going to give him a judgment of acquittal on those two counts based on the argument. Now, the more interesting argument to me, and it's their last argument for new trial, is that, listen, if you were just going to charge him with these two counts, which I originally said when I looked at all the evidence, and don't forget, I was getting calls during this trial from individuals that were telling me, hey, I have information that exonerates what they're saying against Sean Combs, essentially saying that Cassie and others were participating more than just having sex in a room. They were participating more than that. They were paying people. They were hiring people. They were sending me pictures even when Diddy wasn't around. They were asking me to come over even when Diddy wasn't around. These were what these witnesses were telling me, which is really Brady evidence. And I don't know if that was ever turned over. But the more interesting argument is that all these counts were charged. The only thing he was convicted of were the Mann Acts. And he probably wouldn't have been convicted of these Mann Acts, but for all this other stuff that came in to try and prove these counts that they could not prove and did not have a basis for bringing.
Let me just challenge you on that, because this is a jury who didn't find that there was sex trafficking. And I can't confirm that they found him guilty of the Mann Act because of the hotel video or anything else. I mean, it seems to me that they might have convicted him on that based on the travel records, the payment receipts, all about that. Not even necessarily allegations of violence. I mean, do you think that it was because of, let's say, the Intercontinental Hotel video that he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution? It always felt to me that they proved that charge based purely on, the documents.
Well, I always feel like during a trial, whenever you get a guilty verdict on one of the counts or two of the counts out of 6 or 7, you think to yourself, is it because of these other things that they brought up? How bad he is, he's not a good guy, the video came out. Sometimes juries will split the baby, meaning, there's people that want to convict, there's people that don't want to convict, and they're like, okay, let's convict him on these acts. We can all agree we can convict him on these acts. He's not a good guy. He transported these women.
It was predictable. Another example of how the machine moves forward regardless of public emotion. And then there were those who felt something more complicated. Not rage, not relief, just a strange emptiness, like watching a storm finally pass and realizing the damage is still there, even if the rain has stopped. What's important is how fast the conversation shifted. The moment it was confirmed, the focus stopped being on what happened inside and started being about what happens next. Freedom doesn't end a story like this, it reactivates it. It hands it back to the public, fully charged. Every word in that official confirmation was neutral, carefully chosen, stripped of opinion, but neutrality doesn't survive contact with the internet. Within minutes, People were rewriting the meaning. Some called it release, some called it escape, some called it proof, some called it a joke. Same facts, different realities. The confirmation also forced people to confront something they'd been avoiding, that the system isn't built to satisfy emotion. It's built to follow structure, dates, conditions, clauses.
Men across state lines, let's convict them on this. There's always going to be a question of that. The only way to not have a question of that, obviously, is when the jury comes out, someone gives an interview and says, hey, this is why we did it, is because, this tape was so bad and these other incidents were so bad that we were like, we can't just let him walk with nothing. So we convicted him on the Mann Acts. Now, we don't have a juror saying that. Do I think eventually jurors are going to start coming out? Yeah, I think so. I think some of these jurors are going to come out. They're going to want to do some interviews, not before sentencing. And I think after sentencing, I think some of them will come out and we'll discuss it, because I think that was the feeling I was getting from this jury and the reactions they had to Comey's closing, and even the reaction just in general to the 5 or the 6 U.S. attorney team. I think their reactions in general were very noticeable, and I think that this is a jury that wants to talk to people once I think he gets sentenced.
Okay, so now let's move on to the pardon discussion. So if he can't get relief from the court in getting the conviction thrown out or a new trial, can he get relief through a pardon? Before we talk about, is this a real thing, what is the process to even obtain a federal pardon? How do you even go about that?
Sure. So it's a pardon or a commutation. If someone is actually in custody, they could also get a commutation, which does not wipe the crime off your record. It just allows you to get out of jail. So he has that option to give him a commutation. If he gets sentenced, he can also give him a commutation. But as for the process, there's an application on the DOJ website, and I'm part of some charities that also do a lot of pro bono work for pardons and commutations. You can fill out this form, DOJ website. It essentially lists the reasons why you should get a pardon, what kind of community service you've done, things of that nature. There's a separate application for a commutation, but you can file a pardon application, and you could also say, hey, listen, if it's not a pardon, I'm looking for a commutation. You attach your indictment. You would reasons why you feel your crime was unfairly, you were unfairly prejudiced or unfairly convicted. All of those things go into the packet. I always try to help people that are filling it out on their own to show them, what to point out. Those type of cases are always heartening, because those people deserve pardons. They deserve commutations if they're in, and it's some sort of crazy drug offense that was brought up in the 90s. All of those things are reasons for pardons and commutations.
So is this real? I mean, here's the thing. He is in a much better position to get a pardon or a commutation of his sentence because he wasn't convicted of sex trafficking and racketeering. There is a way to justify this based on some of the arguments I just mentioned that his defense team is making, that maybe he shouldn't have been brought up on this. The Mann Act, not as serious as what he's facing. Is this real? Do you think that this is going to happen? That he's going to get a pardon or a commutation from President Trump?
So I don't know if he's going to get one. I do think that it's real because, like I said before, President Trump, whether they like him, don't like him, if he feels something is wrong, and we've seen this happen before in the past, if he feels something is wrong, someone got railroaded, someone was convicted, wrongfully, he will take a look at that. Yeah, Sean Combs has said things in the past that probably were not great. I've read them, but I think that if anyone understands that, I mean, look at President Trump's cabinet. There's individuals on his cabinet. His vice president has said things in the past that weren't great for him. But he understands that people evolve, people change their minds. People understand that there's certain requirements, things that are going on, certain pressures that they're under. And I don't think that would affect whether or not he would.
You can argue morality forever, but when the checklist is complete, the process doesn't ask permission to continue. That doesn't make it feel fair, it just makes it official. The reaction wasn't just loud, it was layered. Comment sections split into camps instantly, one side demanding to know how this could happen, the other side saying this was always how it would happen, and a third side watching both, tired of repeating the same arguments every time a high-profile case reaches this point. What made this confirmation especially explosive was timing. It didn't come after closure. It came while questions still feel unanswered to many people, while trust still feels fragile. while the cultural memory of everything surrounding the case is still fresh and unresolved. That's why the confirmation felt less like an ending and more like a reset. The board cleared, the pieces back in motion, and now every move matters again. Silence became louder than statements. The absence of commentary created space for speculation to grow wild. People filled in the blanks with assumptions.
Didn't have to prove that violence was used, or that fraud was used, or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different.
Fears and expectations. Some imagined remorse. Some imagined strategy. Some imagined nothing had changed at all. Freedom, in this context, isn't simple. It's not just about being able to walk outside. It's about carrying a history that refuses to stay behind bars. No matter where the body goes, the past follows, and the public acts like a shadow that never steps away. The confirmation also reignited debates that never really ended, about privilege, about influence, about how different the experience of punishment can be depending on who you are. Some people see the release as evidence that power softens consequences. Others see it as evidence that time is time, regardless of status. Both arguments collide, and neither one settles the discomfort. What rarely gets discussed is the emotional whiplash. For those who invested years into following the story, the confirmation feels like a sudden stop after constant motion. You don't know what to do with the attention anymore. The outrage doesn't disappear, but it loses direction. And
again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency sweep that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then, the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at.
Then there's the future, because confirmation doesn't just look backward. It forces everyone to imagine what comes next. Will there be a quiet retreat from public life? Will there be a slow reappearance? Will silence be maintained? Or will control of the narrative become the next objective? Every option carries risk. Every step will be dissected. In some ways, the walls didn't disappear, they just turned invisible. The confirmation also exposed how addicted people are to finality. Everyone wants a clean ending. A moment where the screen fades to black and the lesson is clear. But real life doesn't work like that. Real life leaves loose ends. Real life ends chapters without resolving themes. And maybe that's why the reaction is so intense. Because this confirmation reminds people that justice doesn't always look like satisfaction. Sometimes it just looks like procedure. Officials didn't speak with emotion because emotion isn't part of their job, but the public supplied plenty: anger.
While out on bond, he was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison, that he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, "The court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package: that Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport, and they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too: home detention, private security approved by the court, mental health treatment. He'll agree to it all. Now, let me tell you, we kind of previewed that this all would happen, this argument would happen, this new bail package would be presented when we spoke a few weeks ago to renowned bail bondsman, to the celebrities, by the way, to the stars, Ira Judelson, who apparently had been working with Combs' team behind the scenes on working to secure his release. Here's what he said about a new package after the verdict.
When Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. We're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Okay, so with all that in mind, and again, at the time of this recording, I don't see the government's response to this, but here's my take. Now,
sarcasm, disbelief, exhaustion, all of it poured out at once, turning a simple announcement into a cultural flashpoint. What's undeniable is that this confirmation pulled a figure back into relevance whether anyone wanted that or not. Silence had allowed distance. Confirmation erased it instantly. The story is alive again, and it's not waiting for permission to dominate attention. Some people argue that attention is the real currency here. That outrage feeds visibility, that every post, every comment, every reaction keeps the story breathing. And yet, nobody wants to be the one who looks away, because looking away feels like surrender. There's also the uncomfortable truth that the system did exactly what it said it would do. No surprises, no secret deals announced, just a timeline reaching its endpoint. That doesn't make the outcome easier to accept. It just makes it harder to argue against. The confirmation didn't heal anything. It didn't resolve public tension. It didn't close emotional wounds. All it did was remove uncertainty. And uncertainty, for many, was the only thing delaying this reaction. Now the waiting begins again. Waiting for the next move. Waiting for the next headline. Waiting for proof of change or confirmation of fear. Waiting to see whether the world treats this as a return or warning. Because once freedom is confirmed, accountability doesn't disappear, it transforms. It shifts from courts to court of public opinion, and that court never adjourns. Every appearance will be judged, every absence will be questioned, every move framed as either defiance or strategy. There is no neutral ground once confirmation locks the story back into motion. In the end, this moment isn't about celebration or condemnation, it's about collision. The collision between legal finality and emotional unfinished business, between official language and public memory, between process and perception. The confirmation closed a file in one building, but it opened 1,000 threads everywhere else. And that's why this moment feels heavier than a simple release, because it's not just someone walking out, it's society being reminded, once again, that justice doesn't always feel like justice, that endings don't always end, and that freedom, once confirmed, comes with a spotlight that never fully turns off. The announcement was short, the reaction won't be. And this story isn't done talking yet.